Thanks to Baron of Dice, Grey Matter Gaming, and Monument Hobbies for sponsoring this video. Slaanesh is one of the most exciting variants of Chaos Daemons, with a beautiful range of models and some solid datasheets to boot. However, the Demonic Incursion Detachment didn't quite have that Slaaneshi secret sauce that could make a Slaanesh army feel right. That changes today with the new Legion of Excess detachment. If you'd like to read more, head on over to goonhammer.com, link in the description. Detachment rule: Beguiling Aura and Seductive Gambit. Beguiling Aura: Slaanesh demon units can fall back and charge. Seductive Gambit: after a Slaanesh Demons unit ends a charge move, it can give up the fight's first ability. In exchange, it gets full hit and wound rerolls when it fights. This is a wild set of buffs, giving you the always excellent fallback and charge, plus the optional risk of showing your throat before hitting with all the rerolls in the world. Slaanesh armies often have trouble getting tied up with units like tanks, and this lets you either fall back and get around them, or let those generally ineffective vehicle attacks hit your units first before ripping them to pieces. Slaanesh units also have devastating wounds out the wazoo, so you can happily fish for those. This might be riskier against other melee armies like orcs, but you can keep that innate fights first ability for those situations. Keepers of Secrets are one of the few units in your army with the defense to handle popping Seductive Gambit against choppier armies, and you'll probably be running a few of those anyway. These enhancements are split between buffs for your little demons and a few toys for the big ones. False Majesty is a 6-inch aura, giving +1 to wound and melee for everything but your monsters. While this is great on demonettes and even better on fiends, don't forget it also affects chariots and soul grinders. Dreaming Crown is pretty much exactly the same as False Majesty, but for hit rolls instead of wound rolls. Also a great pick. Avatar of Perfection gives your Keeper of Secrets some movement bonuses if they're more than 6 inches from any friendly units. It's not awful, and it might get better if more movement debuffs are brought into the game. Soul Glutton lets your Keeper heal D3 wounds at the end of the fight phase if they killed any models. It's cheap and certainly not bad. These stratagems are kinda wild though, not gonna lie. Thieves of Pain lets you pass damage off from one unit to another, where each time your target unit would take a wound, the unit you're passing to takes a mortal wound instead. This is great for messing with your opponent's damage allocation, and if you can pass those mortal wounds off to a unit with a Feel No Pain, like the Contorted Epitome, you can no-sell a round of shooting or melee attacks. Arch-Agonists gives one monster or two non-monster units +1 to wound and melee. It's a great buff, but you've already got access to wound rerolls and similar bonuses with False Majesty, which makes this stratagem's 2 command point cost hard to swallow. Sensory Excruciation is a buck-wild stratagem, forcing a battle shock test on every unit within your Shadow of Chaos range, and this explicitly includes your own units. Ideally, it'll flip some objectives for you and restore some lost models to your units, but it's too chaotic to depend on. Phantasmal Longing lets one of your units freely move through terrain features. This is the typical Kool-Aid Man stratagem we've been seeing with a load of Grotmist detachments, and it makes life much easier for your monsters and mounted units. Cavalcade of Blades is a frankly insane take on Tank Shock. After a unit charges, roll a die for every one of its models in engagement range and cause a mortal wound on a 4-up, with monsters instead rolling 6 dice. On a big brick of demonettes, this is brutal. Overwhelming Excess is a defensive stratagem you drop on one of your units. An enemy unit shooting your dudes has to take a leadership test at -1, and if they pass, they're hitting at -1 ballistic skill. If they fail, they're battle shocked and have to choose a new target. Forcing leadership tests is never reliable, but you can stack those leadership debuffs with Demonic Terror for a better shot. This is a fun set of stratagems, with Thieves of Pain being especially interesting. At first blush, it sounds like a good way to pass off some wounds from a fragile unit onto something tankier, but it's worth considering the opportunity cost of passing a bunch of mortal wounds onto another unit. It'll probably be best for shunting some damage off an objective holder onto something less important, or the aforementioned Feel No Pain battery that is the Contorted Epitome. Cavalcade of Blades is also a real standout, with potentially ludicrous amounts of mortal wounds being dished out. Sensory Excruciation introduces so much lowercase c chaos to the game that it's hard to really judge its strength, but it'll be memorable whenever you bust it out. Overwhelming Excess is similarly dependent on luck and will either provide a nice little shooting debuff or break your opponent's heart when they can't shoot their preferred target. Let's see some strengths and weaknesses. We've got a strong suite of stratagems and enhancements with several standouts. Among those are multiple ways of messing with your opponent's target priority. The detachment rule also ups the damage output and reliability of an already strong melee army. The problem is it's a melee army, so it's fairly one-dimensional and doesn't have much in the way of shooting. Seductive Gambit is great, but misusing it could easily cost you units. And that's because even with defensive stratagems, Slaanesh units are generally still pretty fragile. It bears repeating that you'll need to be careful with your seductive gambits, and the more you use this detachment, the better you'll get at figuring out when and where you want to use them. Aside from your Keepers of Secrets, Slaanesh remains a fragile faction, and you'll want to make the most of terrain and your target priority stratagems to make sure you can close the distance with your opponent. Stick to cover and go for the jugular when the moment is right, and you'll be sure to put the hurt on whatever is across the table. If that wasn't lavish enough for you, why not head over to goonhammer.com to read more and check out how we'd run this detachment. If you're not yet satisfied, back us on Patreon for a frankly excessive amount of goodies. We'd also like to thank our sponsors, Baron of Dice, Monument Hobbies, and Grey Matter Gaming for sponsoring this video. I've been Crab Claws McLongtongue, and my only phantasmal longing is to go to bed. Thanks for watching.